Frank Rodriguez walked his rounds at exactly 11:47 p.m., just as he had every night for the past 3 years. The corporate complex was quiet, most offices dark, except for the occasional emergency lighting. To the few employees who worked late, Frank was just another middle-aged security guard with a slight limp, making his predictable rounds with his clipboard and flashlight. They saw a man doing a simple job, collecting a modest paycheck, keeping to himself. What they didn't see was a decorated Special Forces veteran who had served 4 tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, a man whose military training had never truly left him, even in civilian clothes. Welcome to The Last Witness. Before we dive into this incredible story, please subscribe to our channel, hit that like button, and let us know in the comments which city you're watching from today. Your support helps us bring you more amazing stories like this one. Frank Rodriguez had been working night security at Meridian Corporate Center for 3 years. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid well enough to supplement his military disability pension and gave him the quiet routine he'd grown to appreciate after 2 decades in Special Forces. The limp in his left leg was a souvenir from an IED explosion in Kandahar that had ended his military career, but it was a small price to pay for surviving when 3 of his teammates hadn't. Most people at Meridian saw Frank as just another security guard, middle-aged, soft-spoken, methodical in his duties. He checked doors, monitored security cameras, and filed incident reports about burned-out light bulbs and unlocked conference rooms. The facility housed 12 different companies, from accounting firms to tech startups, all sharing space in the modern 4-story building. Frank preferred the night shift. Fewer people meant fewer questions about his background, and the solitude reminded him of the long watches he'd pulled in forward operating bases overseas. The building's security system was state-of-the-art, with cameras covering every entrance and motion sensors throughout the facility. Frank knew every blind spot, every camera angle, and every vulnerability in the system, knowledge that came from years of assessing defensive positions in hostile territory. What his employers didn't know was that Frank spent his free time studying the building's security protocols, not because he was dedicated to his minimum wage job, but because old habits died hard. A Special Forces operator learned to assess every environment as both sanctuary and potential battleground. Frank couldn't turn off 20 years of training, even in suburban office building. The other employees who encountered Frank during his rounds saw a polite, unremarkable man who always said good evening and never caused problems. Sarah Kim from the accounting firm on the 3rd floor often worked late and had grown accustomed to Frank's 11:47 p.m. check of her floor. "He's sweet," she'd told her coworkers. "Very quiet, very professional. I feel safer knowing he's here at night." Mike Torres, the IT manager for the building, had a different perspective. Something about Frank's posture and the way he moved suggested military background, but Mike had never asked. Frank was efficient, reliable, and kept to himself. In Mike's experience, those were the best qualities you could ask for in a security guard. What none of them realized was that Frank's 3 years at Meridian had been spent unconsciously preparing for a threat that his military experience told him would eventually come. High-value corporate targets in locations with minimal police response times were prime candidates for organized criminal activity. Frank hoped he was wrong, but he'd learned to trust his instincts about danger. Those instincts proved correct on a Thursday night in November. Frank was completing his 2nd-floor rounds when he noticed something that made him stop dead in his tracks. The motion sensor light in the east parking lot was cycling on and off in an irregular pattern. To most people, it would suggest a malfunction or perhaps a stray cat triggering the sensor. To Frank, it looked like someone was deliberately testing the light's activation range and timing. He moved to the security office and pulled up the parking lot cameras on his monitors. The lot appeared empty, but Frank knew how to read shadows and movement patterns. There, barely visible at the edge of camera range, he caught glimpses of figures moving with deliberate coordination, 3 separate positions, maintaining communication through what appeared to be hand signals, systematically probing the building's perimeter defenses. Frank's heart rate increased, but his breathing remained controlled. This wasn't panic. This was the physiological response of a combat veteran recognizing hostile activity. He had perhaps 10 minutes before they made their move, based on their current reconnaissance pattern. Instead of calling the police immediately, Frank did something that would have surprised anyone who thought they knew him. He opened a locked drawer in the security desk and withdrew items that definitely weren't standard security guard equipment: a tactical radio, night vision monocular, and most significantly, a Glock 19 pistol that he was licensed to carry but had never mentioned to his employers. Frank keyed his tactical radio to a frequency that connected him directly to a private security network used by veterans working in civilian protection roles. "Control, this is Rodriguez at Meridian Corporate. I have visual on 3 unknown subjects conducting organized reconnaissance. Appears to be professional-level activity. The voice that responded was crisp and immediate. Rodriguez, this is Control. We've been tracking increased criminal activity targeting corporate facilities in your area. What's your assessment? Based on their movement patterns and coordination, these aren't opportunistic burglars, Frank replied, his voice calm despite the situation. This is a planned operation with multiple participants. I'm implementing defensive protocols. Understood. Local law enforcement has been notified, but response time to your location is estimated at 12 minutes. Can you maintain security until arrival? Frank checked his watch and assessed the intruders' positions. Affirmative. I'll hold the line. What Frank didn't tell Control was that 12 minutes might be enough time for professional criminals to accomplish their objectives and escape, but it was definitely enough time for a Special Forces veteran to remind himself why his country had spent millions of dollars training him to handle exactly this type of situation. Frank activated the building's lockdown protocol, sealing all electronic access points and triggering silent alarms that would alert the companies housed in the building without warning the intruders. Then he did something that transformed him from a security guard into the soldier he'd never stopped being. He began tactical preparation. Frank knew every inch of Meridian Corporate Center, every sight line, every defensive position, every potential choke point. More importantly, he understood how to use terrain and positioning to multiply his effectiveness against superior numbers. The building that had been his workplace for 3 years became a tactical environment where he held every advantage except numbers. The intruders made their move at exactly 12:17 a.m. Frank watched on his monitors as they approached the building's main entrance with equipment that confirmed his assessment. These weren't amateur burglars. They carried electronic lockpicks, signal jammers, and moved with military precision that suggested professional training. Frank counted at least 4 individuals now, possibly more outside his camera range. They breached the main entrance in less than 90 seconds, defeating locks and alarms with efficiency that spoke to extensive preparation. Frank wasn't surprised. He'd identified most of the building's vulnerabilities during his first month on the job. What the intruders didn't know was that Frank had spent the subsequent 2 years and 11 months preparing for exactly this scenario. As they entered the lobby, Frank was no longer in the security office. He'd moved to a predetermined position on the second floor, where he could observe their entry and movement patterns while remaining undetected. His slight limp had disappeared, replaced by the fluid movement patterns that had kept him alive through 4 combat deployments. Through his night vision monocular, Frank observed the intruders' operation. They were targeting the 3rd floor, specifically the accounting firm where Sarah Kim often worked late. Financial records, client information, corporate accounts, high-value data that could be sold or used for identity theft and corporate espionage. This wasn't a robbery, it was corporate infiltration. Frank keyed his radio again. Control. Subjects have breached the facility and are moving toward the 3rd floor. Appears to be targeting Hartwell and Associates accounting firm. This is data theft, not burglary. Understood. ETA on local response is now 8 minutes. Are you maintaining safe distance? Frank smiled grimly. Negative. Control. I'm implementing active security measures. What happened next would have shocked anyone who knew Frank as a quiet security guard, but it would have been immediately recognizable to anyone who had served alongside him in Afghanistan. Frank moved through the building like the ghost he'd been trained to be. 20 years of Special Forces operations had taught him how to use darkness, silence, and surprise to neutralize threats regardless of numerical disadvantage. The corporate office building became a combat zone, where he held every tactical advantage. The first intruder never saw Frank coming. As the man worked to defeat the 3rd floor stairwell door, Frank appeared behind him with the silent efficiency of a professional soldier. A brief struggle, expertly applied pressure to specific nerve points, and the intruder was unconscious and zip-tied with restraints Frank had carried in his security kit for 3 years, hoping never to use them. The second intruder realized something was wrong when his partner failed to report in. Frank was waiting when the man came looking, dropping him with a combat technique that left the intruder conscious but completely immobilized. By the time the remaining intruders understood they weren't facing a helpless security guard, Frank had already neutralized half their team and positioned himself between them and their exit route. The building's layout, which Frank had studied extensively, became a tactical maze where he could appear and disappear at will while herding the intruders toward positions of his choosing. Control. This is Rodriguez. 4 subjects neutralized. Building secure. No injuries to civilians or security personnel. The silence on the radio lasted several seconds before Control responded. Rodriguez, did you say 4 subjects neutralized? What's your status? All clear, Control. Subjects are restrained and ready for law enforcement pickup. Building security has been maintained. Rodriguez, what's your military background? Frank smiled for the first time that night. 20th Special Forces Group, Control. Some habits never die. When police arrived 7 minutes later, they found 4 professional criminals zip-tied and unconscious, arranged in the lobby like packages ready for delivery. Frank stood beside them in his security guard uniform, clipboard in hand, appearing every bit the mild-mannered employee except for the tactical radio and night vision equipment now visible on his belt. Detective Maria Santos surveyed the scene with amazement. You did all this by yourself. Just doing my job, Detective.
detective," Frank replied calmly, "though I may have used some techniques they don't teach in security guard training." As the criminals were loaded into police vehicles, Detective Santos reviewed their equipment and identification. "These guys are professionals, part of a criminal organization that's been hitting corporate facilities across 3 states. They had detailed plans of your building, employee schedules, security protocols. How did you know they were coming?" Frank considered his answer carefully. 20 years in the Army teaches you to recognize when something doesn't feel right, detective. The rest was just applying appropriate security measures. Over the following days, as news of the incident spread through Meridian Corporate Center, Frank found his quiet routine permanently altered. Employees who had barely noticed him before now approached with curiosity and respect. Sarah Kim, whose files had been the criminal's target, stopped by the security desk with homemade cookies and genuine gratitude. "I had no idea," she told Frank. "Everyone just thought you were—"
We didn't realize you were—
"A soldier," Frank finished gently. "I was, for a long time. Now I'm a security guard who happened to remember some old skills when they were needed." Mike Torres, the IT manager, had a different reaction. "I knew there was something about you," he admitted. "The way you carried yourself, your situational awareness, but I never imagined you were special forces. Most people see what they expect to see," Frank replied. "Middle-aged man with a limp, working security. It's easier than explaining the alternative." The attempted break-in made local news, though Frank declined all interview requests. The story focused on the criminal's capture and the prevention of significant corporate data theft, mentioning only that an alert security guard had foiled the operation. Frank preferred it that way. 3 weeks later, Frank received a visit from his old commander, Colonel Patricia Hayes, now retired and working in corporate security consulting. "Heard you had some excitement," she said, settling into the visitor chair in Frank's security office. "Nothing I couldn't handle," Frank replied, though it felt good to use the training again. "The way I heard it, you took down 4 professionals without breaking a sweat. That kind of skill set is wasted on routine security work." Frank gestured around the quiet office. "This suits me, Colonel. No politics, no bureaucracy, no one shooting at me. Sometimes boring is exactly what you want." Hayes nodded, understanding. "But if you ever change your mind, there are opportunities. Private military contractors, executive protection, corporate security consulting. Your skills are rare and valuable. I'll keep that in mind," Frank said. "But for now, I like knowing that people here can sleep safely because someone's watching."
After Hayes left, Frank resumed his evening routine. The building felt different now, somehow more like home than workplace. The employees treated him with new respect, but more importantly, they felt genuinely safe. Sarah Kim worked late without worry, knowing Frank was on duty. Mike Torres had upgraded the security system with Frank's input, turning the building into a fortress that looked like an ordinary office complex. Frank still made his rounds at exactly 11:47 p.m., still carried his clipboard and flashlight, but now he also carried the tactical radio and night vision equipment, openly, badges of a warrior who had found peace in protecting others. 6 months later, when another corporate facility across town was targeted by the same criminal organization, their intelligence included a warning: avoid buildings with veteran security personnel. Risk assessment too high. Frank smiled when Detective Santos shared this intelligence with him during a routine follow-up visit. "Seems you've developed a reputation," she said. "Good," Frank replied. "Maybe that means I won't have to prove myself again." But Frank knew he would if necessary. The limp in his leg was permanent, a reminder of the price he'd paid in service to his country. The skills that had kept him alive through 4 combat deployments would never fade, even in civilian clothes. And the responsibility he felt to protect innocent people was as strong as it had ever been. That night, as Frank made his 11:47 p.m. rounds, he reflected on the path that had brought him to Meridian Corporate Center. 20 years of military service had ended with injury and disability, but hadn't ended his ability to serve. Sometimes the most important battles were fought by ordinary-looking people in unremarkable places, protecting those who never knew they were in danger. The quiet security guard walking the halls with a slight limp carried within him the skills and experience of America's elite fighting forces. Most nights, those skills weren't needed, but when they were, Frank Rodriguez was ready to remind anyone who threatened innocent people that some soldiers never really retire, they just change uniforms. Tonight, like every night, Frank would stand watch. And anyone foolish enough to threaten his building would discover that the most dangerous opponent is often the one you never see coming. What would you have done in Frank's position? Would you have called the police immediately, or would you have used your training to handle the situation yourself? Do you think veterans like Frank should reveal their military background to their civilian employers, or is their value in remaining underestimated? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to The Last Witness for more incredible stories of ordinary people with extraordinary backgrounds who step up when it matters most.